Welcome to Pigeon Racing World with Winners1. In tonight's show, to my right, we have Jeff Weaver and Stephen Kearsey as our regular guest.
Evening, Rod.
Evening, Rod.
Hey guys, and in Brisbane we have David Christensen. G'day, David.
Hi, Rod. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Stephen, and hi, viewers.
G'day, David.
How are you, David?
Tonight's show is dedicated to our segment on starting up. So what we'll be discussing about the one most important thing in racing is actually racing itself, where the birds are going to a race, coming home, and what we do in preparation for the long races. Stephen, I'd like to start with you. We all do a little bit different. When you prepare your birds for a race, what's your normal weekly thing that you do leading up to that race? Say from your Monday, we're basking on a Thursday night. What's your program?
Well, normally every Monday I bath my pigeons. I loft fly them. If I think they need it, they might get a short toss on Tuesday. Otherwise, they just get loft flowing on Tuesday and Wednesday, and basking day being Thursday, I never let the pigeons out. And I do that for a reason. I've, over the years, had pigeons that I thought I should send this week, and I've let them out on Thursday, and when I've gone to find them on Thursday night, they're gone. Because they've either, the falcons attacked them and they haven't come home, or sometimes later in the year with young hens, they just disappear. They just fly away. I've had that happen many, many times when they get really fit.
Do you change your feeding from early in the week to later in the week before basking?
No. I feed the same mixture from when I start training before racing right to the end of the year. I don't change it.
Jeff, what about yourself? What do you do on, say, from your Sunday lead up to your basking on Thursday night?
I'm a little bit like Steve. I will bath them on a Monday, and I just train the hens and cocks separately. Same every day. I do fly them on a Thursday, and I feed them the same all week.
Well, what's your basic feed rations? Do you have a break-up? Do you use a general common mix? Do you make your own mix?
I make my own mix. I feed peas, wheat, milo, throw in a little bit of saff occasionally, and give them a little bit of corn occasionally. But I do change the mix depending on how they've been training and how they've been racing.
As a general breakup of your mix, what would it be, a percentage of peas, milos as a general?
I vary it a bit. I generally about 70% peas, and then I mix the wheat and milo, and I throw a handful of saff in occasionally. And the reason why I give them a bit of corn is because they get it in the units when they're away, so they know what it is, but I don't feed a lot of corn.
Steve, what about your feeding proportions?
Well, it's a bit different to Jeff's. I feed about 1/3 safflower, 1/3 peas, and the other third is mixed maize, milo and wheat. Towards the end of the week, I might, if they're not eating the peas, I might give them a bit more safflower. It just depends on the weather. If it's cold, they eat a bit more of some. I find maize is, well, I know that with maize in my pigeons, they just throw it all over the loft towards the end of the week or towards the end of the year, and it's really worthless feeding it because they hardly eat any of it. They just don't want it.
Does any of you guys actually feed barley?
I don't.
I don't, no.
I have tried these things in the past, but I don't. No, I stick to what I've been successful with.
Why are you against, or you're not particularly against it? Why isn't it part of your feeding mixes?
Well, for me, I've been successful doing what I'm doing, so I don't change it. So I have fed barley in the past, but I just, as you go around and try different things, you come to stage where you're happy with something and I don't alter it. Unless I hear someone's doing something and I think it might be worth a try, I might give it a try, but I end up judging everything on what I do in my loft and how my birds perform.
Stephen, you know, overseas, a lot of flyers, especially the ones that concentrate on the short and middle distance, they feed a fair bit of barley. With your experience overseas, what's your view on that?
Well, I find that when my visits overseas, they do feed a lot of barley, but they race completely differently to us. And if I was racing 2, 3 and 4 and 5 year olds at 100k twice a week, probably would feed barley and keep them very light. But we don't do that here. We race young pigeons. We basically are racing young birds, what they call young birds overseas, and therefore I think the pigeons need a heavier diet because we're asking them to fly, well, the races that I like, which is from 300 miles to 500 miles, any of those races they've got to fly all day. And Gabby van der Beela, I remember him saying that if you feed light and you get a hard race at about 900 metres, he has to put those pigeons away till next year. If they fly 500k at 900 metres, those pigeons are no good till next year if you feed them the light methods. So I just found that it works for me. I think it works in Australia. A lot of people feed few peas in Australia. They say in Europe, don't feed peas. Well, they're the most expensive grain in Europe, so that's why. Barley's the cheapest. I was looking at something from South Africa the other day, and they feed nearly 50% black sunflower seed. And the reason is because it's as cheap as anything. So a lot of these things have been driven by what the costs are. In Australia, peas are relatively cheap, so we feed peas, but they are also good for the pigeons, I think. Just my opinion.
What about the view, and I do it a little bit, I'm not a big barley feeder either, but when the birds come home from race, and we'll talk about that in a second, what you guys might, if you're doing extra, but I feed my depurity mix, 1/3 depurity, 1/3 race, and 1/3 of energy mix. So they've got as much as they want in there, and they can pick what they like, because I find that, I add actually extra SAF too, but the reason is I think the pigeon knows what it wants, that it needs, that's my theory, and it can have anything as much as it wants. What about yourself, Steve? We'll go first. When they return, what do you do?
Well, when they return, they have a full tray in front of them of the whole mix, and they can eat as much or as little as they like. And, you know, you can tell if the pigeons, I find that if the pigeons are in really good form, they hardly eat any peas when they come home. They won't eat the maize, but they'll eat like the small seed. If they're not as fit as they probably should be, and the race has been a bit hard on them, you tend to see them eat the peas. The pigeons know, as you say, but I don't. Well, they get a choice of peas, and I always give 2 sorts of peas: peas, wheat, milo, safflower, maize. And they can eat as much of that as they like. I mean, if the tray that I've got in the returning loft where the birds return to is getting low, I just top it up.
I do the same. Jeff, what do you do when the birds return? Is there any sort of bit difference in what you're giving them?
No, I'm pretty much the same as Steve. I give them a full mixture in the trays of all the seeds, and they can eat whatever they like of whatever's there. I'll also have lately thrown pellets in. But once again, if they want to eat them, they do. If they don't, they don't. They can have anything they want when they get home from the race.
What about in the water? What do you have anything special in the water when they return?
Not me.
Water.
I just have water, plain water. No.
What about if we race in winter in Australia, but it does get warm later in the season. What about any, say, electrolytes, things like that? Have you ever tried that? Have you seen any benefit, or you just don't believe in it?
Well, I've tried it, and I haven't seen any difference, so I just do water. You know, I just think pigeons want to be out. When they come home, they go and have a drink. It's water they'll drink. You don't want them hesitating, because then you can have problems if the pigeons won't drink the water. You then have greater chance of dehydration. But if you've got plain water, the pigeons drink it. What I've noticed though is if you feed them, it's been a hot day, sometimes, not always, but sometimes when the pigeons come home, they'll go and eat pink minerals. And that's just getting the salts back up. If they want it, they're in front of them, so they can do that.
Because our pink mineral powder, well, the ones I know of, anyway, they have salts in them anyway.
That's
don't
right,
they?
that's correct.
Yeah.
But I give the pigeon the choice rather than forcing it on the pigeon.
Jeff, what about you?
I put nothing in the water, and I've got the grains, the grits and the pink powder in as well. So they have what they want, whenever they want.
Yeah, g'day guys, Richard Clement from the NCF Federation in Newcastle, flying partnership with my father Malcolm up here, and just wanted to comment today on a product that we've been using over the last couple of seasons called Protein Plus, which we sourced from Winners1 in Victoria. Protein Plus is a product that we started using in our stock loft as a trial product a couple of years ago. We were interested in how we could ensure that when our youngsters had those last few days in the nest before they went into the race loft, and as they went into the race loft didn't lose any body in condition, and we found that the product was particularly helpful with that, and we were very happy with our first trials. We used it then a little bit more in the stock loft and found that over time our pigeons, particularly as they went into the third and fourth round of breeding, weren't losing body and were still in really good condition at the end of the breeding season, so that was really a positive for us in the first year. Last year we used it in the race loft for the first time. We found it to be a really good product to help put condition back onto the birds and to help the birds build back up a little bit quicker than what they probably previously would have without having to change their feed base too much, particularly early in the week. We've had a pretty successful couple of years up here, winning multiple club and combine and federation averages, and last year particularly was a record-breaking year for us, and we put some of that success down to the fact that we've been able to use this product consistently now, and we'd have no hesitation in recommending it for other flyers who want to try and aid that recovery period, particularly after a hard race or a hard toss.
Now we're talking about water. We're talking about grain leading up, sending birds to the race, and we're talking from the early short races at 200 k's up to a fair distance. What's your program in vitamins, medications, anything like that? Firstly, do you get them tested before you medicate? Do you look at them? When's the last, if you had to medicate or you thought you had to medicate, when would you cut that off? And do you give a general multivitamins or apple cider vinegar or anything else in the water leading up to that race? Steve?
Well, I'm not a great believer in medication. If the pigeons are sick, I think you should definitely find out what's wrong and treat for the illness they have. I'm not in favour of blanket antibiotics, that every second week you put 4 days of this in, and then on the alternate week they get 4 days of that or whatever. I don't do any of that. I think your pigeons, if you want to fly races where the bird's got to fly all day, you've got to breed pigeons that can survive it. You don't want to breed pigeons that you've got to keep them on medication 7 days a week just to get them home. I want pigeons that can fly 14 hours on the day, 12 to 14 hours. I mean, they don't always do it, but that's what I like. And, and I think that if you treat them all the time, they're not going to do that, because naturally you're not doing the bird any favours. But the pigeons will develop immunity to things. They develop the ability to combat things like canker to a degree, coxy to a degree, and coxy, a lot depends on your loft. If your loft isn't good, you'll get coxy all the time. If you've got a nice dry loft, I mean, I had my pigeons tested, and I think every year for about 20 years, and I used to say, any coxy? No. 20 years I never had any coccidia in, because my loft's very dry. It's just dry. And I think if you have a dry loft, you don't get a lot of these issues. If you have a damp loft, you get trouble, because damp is conducive for all the wrong things to grow.
One thing that I get a bit cocky early, my loft's dry, but a lot of grass, and early in the piece I used to have a lot of trees overhanging as well, and I got rid of them to try to get rid of a lot of that moisture. And I found early in the season, because I test them every week, you'd find it more. By just getting rid of those trees, it made a difference. Yours is off the ground, it's double-storey loft, so you're not even getting the moisture from the grass because you're a long way from it.
Yeah, that's right.
Jeff, talk about medication before, leading up, anything else in the water, vitamins, what do you do?
I do try and get them tested before the season starts. I treat accordingly. I do worm them before the season starts. I think that's the critical time, because I think winter and the dampness comes in, and it's a time when we tend to have a lot of pigeons in the loft. So that's when you like it to have a lot of stress. And then after that, I tend to treat if I think it's absolutely necessary. So I don't have a regular program. And I'm also a firm believer that, like Steve said, pigeons need to have a natural strength in them, and sometimes you're better off, I think, letting the weak ones go. And because the stronger pigeons will fly the season. They build a natural immunity, you get better strength of pigeon. And I think Godfrey Stevens and John Yates and Doug Ince proved that. They fly the distance. Godfrey never medicated at all. So these pigeons will overcome that. The good ones will overcome it.
We'll be back with more Pigeon Racing World with Winners1 after this short break.
I want to tell you a little story about my best pigeon, Gladiator, the Olympic pigeon and national ace bird for my loft. Yeah, that weekend he won the second prize, so he became Olympic pigeon and national ace bird. In the year 2000 I bought a pigeon voicer in the club here from Jules Sampermans, and this was the papa of Tiesto that I bought there. Also we raised this pigeon that we bought as voicer, and he won 2 times the first prize on Bourse. Then we bring him to the breeding loft and he bred us famous pigeon Tiesto.
In 2017 I made my restart in the pigeon sport, and I decided to build my strain around one specific pigeon, Finn, and also of course his parents. So my second base pigeon in the loft is Ricky. Ricky is related as well to Finn because the mother and himself are cousins. Ricky was my first national ace pigeon since I raced with the pigeons in 2014, and he was also very successful the years afterwards, so he was 3 years in a row in the top 6 in the PIPA ranking on the long distance races.
I started with my own birds in a small loft in 1995. It was a loft by 2x2 only. I lived with my mother. It was for me also easy to get into the sport in a short period. Good pigeons also, because we were related to several guys who flew on a high level. The most famous name was of course the Huben family. 2004, Queen L, our basic hen, she won first national on La Souterraine. Was about 600 kilometers. She was fastest against 19,000 pigeons, old birds and young birds together.
Ik ben Nicolas Gijzelbrecht en ben gestart met PIPA in 2000 als nieuwswebsite. En in 2008 ben ik dan begonnen in het klein met PIPA Elite Center. Dat was met een koppeltje duiven en dat één koppeltje zijn dan meerdere koppels geworden. En in de loop van de jaren zijn we zo wel geëvolueerd. beslist hebben met ons 3 dat een duif maar verkocht mag worden als wij vinden dat die goed genoeg is voor onszelf, voor de eigen kweek.
Welcome back to Pigeon Racing World with Winners1. David, you have a couple of questions for the guys.
Stephen, over the years you've had a lot of success. At what distance do you rate as your optimum?
David, I like to think my best results are from 500 kilometres, 300 miles, out to 840 kilometres, that's 500 miles. They're the races that I aim with my breeding all about, and I just love the 500 mile race, the 800 kilometre race, so I just love that, and I've had reasonable success in the last 10 years. I've been placed at 509 out of 10 years, which is, I'm quite proud of that for myself. No one else notices, but I notice. But, and I just love racing 500 miles. I reckon it's the ultimate where the pigeons fly all day, get home just on dark. That's what you aim for, and if they get home on dark and you haven't got one, you hope you've got one before sunrise in the morning. And if you've got one there before sunrise, you still feel as though you've had a good year. That's what I aim at.
With your national winner, what distance was that race?
The national winner was at 400 miles. That was a reasonably warm day. The returns. The clocking was a bit sporadic. I won that race by over 4 minutes actually, but she was a good pigeon. She was a double fed hen, that was a second fed position. And the day she came, she did 1300. It was a really nice velocity, and we saw her come, and it was a great thrill to watch her come out of the northeast all by herself. It was just a great thrill.
Jeff, at what distance do your pigeons excel at?
Well, I suppose over the years I've probably been strongest in the 600 if you look at my record, but I'm trying to do a lot better earlier, and over the last 5 or 6 years I've improved my flying at 500 miles enormously. I like day racing. I like the 500s. I think a good 500 is a day when everyone in the VHA's got a chance to get a pigeon, and we have a lot of hours on the wing. I love those races. Having said that, I've won 2 feds at 400 over recent times, and that's, any win's a good win. I've had good pigeons at 300 mile. I won the Diamond Valley Centre by 21 minutes in a 300 mile race. That was a big thrill to me.
Is there one race that you rate as your greatest achievement?
Well, I suppose winning the National was a big buzz. I've had some really satisfying flies. I've had 2 600s where I've had enormous returns. When I won it in 2009, I think my 5th pigeon home would have been 13th fed. The last 600, I think I had 6 in, would have had 6 in the top 10. But the national win, a big win. And the hen I won, as I said before, the hen I won at Diamond Valley Centre by 21 minutes. That was a massive buzz to have that sort of a special pigeon. And of course she bred the national winner, so she's bred on.
I must admit, sitting next to 2 people who have won nationals, people may not understand that nationals in Melbourne is only one a year. It brings in all the federations, and it's not an easy race to win. The best I've been able to do is 3 times win our federation national, but never been able to win it. So it's a big achievement, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's a 10 bird limit race as well. So you're not only, up against it, flying against everyone in Melbourne, but also you have to be able to pick your pigeons for the day.
It can be a real hard race too.
Too right.
Can be both. Easy and hard.
Now, where people again may not realise, because this show does go not just we're out in Australia, but across to a lot of countries now. You guys both race in the Diamond Valley Centre, which is a short position compared to your overall federation. I think there's about 60, 80 kilometres from the short to longer,
Yep.
right? And the demographics of Melbourne is we've got ranges, mountains, besides deal with the wind. So as a rule, and you've got a lot of strong flyers in your centre, it's not generally conducive to short racing to get high results. What's your thoughts on that? Is it mainly do you concentrate for the bit later races? Is your feeding process or your feeding methods, is that really aimed for that? Or is there anything you could do, maybe change the things to score a high fed or winner fed in those real short races?
Well, I've got an opinion on that, that if you want to win the short races, we've got to make the pigeons in our fed come over our roof instead of coming 10 kilometres east of us, because that's where the bulk of the pigeons come these days. Even when I won the national, my pigeon didn't come online, it came out of the northeast. Most of my pigeons these days come out with an easterly aspect to where they come. When I first moved to my present location 30, 40 years ago, the pigeons used to come dead straight, and our centre used to be able to compete from the first race to the last, because we saw hundreds and thousands of pigeons go over every week. Now, if I see other pigeons other than my own go over my roof, that is the exception, because they don't come in. The bulk of the pigeons are now going into the east-southeast of our fed, and the pigeons, when they're liberated, they, with the westerly aspect in the winds being the natural wind, the pigeons tend to go onto the eastern side, and with most of the pigeons going down the east, I think in those early races, that's why it's very hard for us, because the pigeons square up and come back to us. We have excellent, look, there's pigeons that race in the Diamond Valley Centre in those early races that are doing a fantastic job, absolutely, but they struggle to get into the fed with them.
They can get 6, 10, 12, you see that, but you see less win. And that's not taking anything from the winner deep up, because
No,
they've got a lot of competition down there, and to win, irrespective in your fed or any fed, it's a great result. So we're not taken from that.
Can I just say something? On those short races in our centre, if you win our centre, we might get 28th in the fed, but you've beaten 1,000 pigeons that are coming into your area. So it is still a very good pigeon. I mean, there's 1,000 other pigeons in the race, and you've won against 1,000. I mean, most of the people in our centre look to win the centre. I mean, that's, you know, and everything else then follows from there. If you've got a brilliant pigeon, as Jeff said before, he won the centre by, 20 minutes. I won the centre by 14 minutes, and I got second fed. No one else in the centre got in the fed, and that pigeon turned out later on that same year to be a brother to the pigeon that got fifth in South Africa. So it showed that the pigeons have got it, but you've got to have the day for them.
If you was advising a flyer who's maybe their perception they're not in a good position, what could you advise them to help get their birds maybe breaking a little bit earlier to try to come a little bit straighter? Would it be stop mob tossing, single toss all your birds, you know, where you think the breaking point is? Stephen, first, what would you suggest or advise?
Well, it's at the end of the day, it's all about the pigeons. It doesn't matter if you single toss them, mob toss them, do all sorts of things. If the pigeons aren't up to the job, you're not going to get them. I mean, I know people that have tossed the whole year opposite to the line of flight and flown extraordinarily well. So those pigeons, the only time they ever got on the line of flight was when they were in a race. So I'm not really sure that that's important. It's the same as what I think is a bit of a furphy, where people say you have to train your pigeons in the dark to get them in the dark. I don't think that's absolutely necessary. I think if the pigeons are absolutely on top of their game, as fit as you can get them, you'll get them in the dark. Because the pigeons will just do it. The pigeons got to want to do it. If you can, you can let them go. Look, and I did this back when in the 60s. Dad and I, we got pigeons, we trained them, we liberated them midnight, all the time, to get them to come in the dark. And they would fly the tosses in the dark, no problems. Then we'd race and we'd clock pigeons in the dark that we hadn't done any of that to, and the pigeons we'd done that to would be home next morning. So once again, it all gets back to the individual pigeon, whether it's got the ability or not. That's the hard part. That's the really essence of the sport, isn't it? Being able to find pigeons to do what you want to do at the distance that you love to fly at.
Jeff, to someone who's offline and is finding it hard to get that edge or get them coming straight, what would you advise them to do?
I think, once again, I agree with Steve. The pigeon's got to have the ability, but I think you can enhance that by tossing online and tossing in small numbers to actually help the pigeon, what do you say, improve that ability or practice that ability. But at the end of the day, they've got to be there and they've got to think about breaking and coming when they're racing. And it does all become about the pigeon. But I think you can train pigeons to improve that ability. And I think you'll find some of the really good flyers in the VHA do that. But it's very time consuming. And to try and get pigeons to single toss, get them to single toss and go, that's going to take a lot of time. They'll do it. Depends how much time you've got. So I also think with Steve, I don't think you have to train in the dark, but I think if a pigeon's fit and good enough and has the confidence, it will keep coming in the dark. That's my belief.
So have you ever practiced single on up or two up at a time or five at a time in the past, and do you do it now?
I've tried it, but I didn't do it very much because you just don't get time. It can take a long while to get pigeons to leave straight away in small numbers. I've actually let pigeons go in tens, and you think the first 10's cleared, you can't see them, you let the next 10 up, and next thing you know, you've got 20 pigeons flying around. And people tell me it does take a while to get it happening. So I have tried doing it, but I haven't been able to put enough time into it to do it consistently, so I don't. I'm hoping that if you keep breeding from pigeons that are successful, they'll end up having more of that natural ability anyway.
Steve, have you tried 1 up, 2 ups and 5 ups and that?
Yeah, well, when I first started in pigeons back in late 50s, early 60s, I used to go with a group of what I called old guys in those days, and they're probably younger than I am now. Charlie Brown and Huey Shearer and Les Keats and Jackie Murrowwood, and we used to go and they used to toss 1 pigeon out of each basket. But the interesting thing to me was that the guys that were doing that, Charlie Brown was the best flyer and he still flew best on Saturday. Those other fellas, they didn't improve remarkably by doing that and doing single tossing and all that sort of thing. It didn't seem to make a great deal of difference. He was the better pigeon man and he, well, better able to get the birds in condition. I shouldn't say pigeon man, but he was a better trainer than them, so he got his pigeons fitter and he flew better.
To Jeff and Stephen, how often do you send your pigeons to a race?
Well, I basically divide my team into 3 teams, my birds into 3 teams, and send them every 3rd week. Having said that, the first 4 club races, the VHA had 4 club races, I like to give them 2 races each. Often my pigeons will go to the 600 or the 700 if I decide to race the 7 with 5 or 6 races under their belt. So I send them pretty regularly.
Well, I do similar. I have, I like, in the club races, I like the birds to get at least 2 of them. And then I send 3-week about. And when I get to the long races, up to the 400 mile, 700k, 800k races, I might send it. They might be 4 weeks, they might be 3 weeks, they might be 2 weeks. It just depends on the individual pigeon. But in a normal series where we have, 3, 6, 9, 13 races, they'll go every 3 weeks up until that point, and then they'll go and maybe they'll do the first 4 and the first 5, or they might do the second 4 and the first 5, because the second 4 and the first 5 is 3 weeks and the other one is 4 weeks. So it just all depends, and sometimes I'll double them back. I've done that as well. It just depends how the pigeon looks in the loft. I mean, just because you've got them in a 3-week team, at that end of the season, it's more important that you're picking the pigeons on their condition and how they look, and, you know, rather than just sending them. They've got to be spot on to go. If you want them to fly all day, they have to be spot on. You can't send passengers. You won't get them home. And it's not fair on the pigeon either. So it's just the wrong thing to do.
You both had a lot of success, what we call our classic distances, which is the 350, 400 miles, and in your federation you have 2 500 miles as well. Beyond the breeding, obviously you've got birds that are bred for it. What are you looking for when you're selecting the pigeon on the day of basking? Is there anything that you will straight away say, no, you're not going, you're not ready? Steve, start with you.
Well, pigeons that I like to fly at 500 miles are the pigeons that I think on basketing day are in the best condition. I mean, I've got placed in a 500 mile fed with pigeons that people have told me by breeding will never fly more than 5 hours. I mean, it's all about the conditioning of the pigeon. I mean, that's what you're trying to do. It's a long lead up. You're starting with your club race and you've got nearly 18 weeks till you get to those races. And those pigeons are being built up progressively over that time to be in the condition that they go there. It's not a 5-minute thing. You don't say, I'm going to race the 500 3 weeks before and say, oh, well, I better start training with pigeons. The pigeons have got to have that consistent build up over the whole year of the physicality of it, of building them. You're building their aerobic ability, their lungs and all that. They've got to be used to flying to be able to do what you want them to do. But as I said, I pick them on what I think is they're ready to go the race. And it's very hard to explain individual pigeons in your loft. You look at them and you say, I'm sending you, without even handling the pigeon. That's the one that's got to go. Remember when I won the 500 mile fed a few years ago? That pigeon on basketing day was the best pigeon in my loft just by looks. But when you handle, it's just handled like all the others. But on looks, she looked fantastic. You know, so you've got to go by what the pigeons are like. Sometimes I only send 4 or 5 pigeons to the 500 mile race because they're the ones that are in the condition to do the race.
Jeff, what about you? What are you looking for and what preparation for those longer races?
So the season, as Steve said, goes for 18 weeks. You start training your pigeons, making sure they're flying the roof 6 weeks before the first race, and the training for those distance races starts then. Every pigeon goes through a program. By the time you've got to the 500s, they've had a lot of flying, as my birds have had every 3rd week. If that's, of course, if they've got flights and everything and they're healthy enough. I'm very confident. I get very good returns from the distance, so I'm very confident my birds can do the distance. I've picked pigeons. I've picked McClock pigeons on several occasions because they look so good and you can just see them on the floor how good they are. Other times you put pigeons in you know are bred for the distance and they pop up because they've got it in them. And I just further to that, I have doubled pigeons back at 500 and I've sent pigeons back from the second 5 to the 6 a week later, which I did 2 years ago, and got second fed. It's all about how they look, how you think they've handled the fly, and the fact that they are bred for it. I'm very confident I'll get them home. Whether I'll win with them is another thing. but I have a lot of pigeons left over at the end. I don't start with a lot of pigeons relative to what a lot of people do. I start with about 120, sometimes 130. At the end of the year I often have 50, 60 pigeons left. I hear guys drop that many in 2 races. So it's bred into them, and things will pop up, pigeons will pop up. It's amazing what pigeon will pop up, and you'll score at a long race when it's had to do everything right, though it hasn't shown any form. But you send them healthy, you make sure they're not injured, carrying flights, and that's how I do it. I don't like to send them if I don't think they're right. I don't like to be cruel to them, but I do look and make sure if they look all right, and make sure they look all right in the body, they go.
What is a definite no? And we'll talk about the back end of the season, because if you've got a club race at 250 Ks, it might be a bit different. The back end, when they're going to be quite a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours on the wing, what is a definite no that bird will not go?
Oh, well, if there's obviously something wrong with them, if I think they haven't been, there's something not right, any sort of thing, they might have been hawked or something early on. Generally though, if they're in good nick, I'll send them. If they look alright, I'll send them, because that's what they're bred to do.
Steve, what's a definite no for you?
Well, similar. I mean, the pigeon that when you go down to pick, if you've got a pigeon all fluffed up in the corner, well, you'd never send that in a million years. The pigeons have got to look shiny, bright-eyed, white wattle, pink feet, all the standard things. I like when I pick them up that they're silky. I love silky feathers. I like to have a bit of, because I haven't let them out on Thursday, quite often they'll have a bit of, the white on their flights, and just look terrific. If they don't look, if you pick a pigeon up and you've got a doubt, you leave it home. That's really the most important thing for particularly for a new flyer. Once he starts to learn and handle pigeons, and once he starts to get a rough idea, if he picks a pigeon up and says, oh, no, not this one, well, don't send it. Because next week when you pick it up, you might say, oh, this is the one. And if you send it the first week, you run the chance of losing it or pulling it so far down that it just doesn't get back until next year.
Now, sometimes you look at a bird on a perch, real nice, you grab it, handle's nice, body's what, wings right. If you open up the throat, it might be very red inside, not a nice pink colour. Would that stop you sending it?
I never look.
Never look. What about you?
I never look either. I might say too, 2 years ago, the second 500-mile race, I clocked, and I had pigeons coming home. I got 9th and 11th fed in the VHA. I had a pigeon come home, looked like it'd just been flying 4 doors. Came in, did a few laps, landed on the board, wandered in. Looked like it had only been 100 metres. So I raced over and got the ring number off it, and I sent that back to the 600 the next week. Now, I also I did send 4 back from the 500 to the 600 the next week. I actually got second fed with that pigeon's sister. But that pigeon flew that race. I think it was my 7th pigeon home. So I judge, that's how I did that. That's why I sent that bird back. It just didn't look like it had been anywhere. So that was an interesting exercise.
Funny enough, I've got a Gabbage in stock now off the imports, and he went to me 400 and got first club 10th, and then I sent him to the 5 a few weeks later, and he was first club 3rd fed, and he landed the same. And I thought, this cock could go to 600 miles. You know? And I looked and he was off the imports, and he went in the stock. But you could tell when he landed, he'd done nothing, and he was bright-eyed, and they were good velocities too. What, like 1800 metres per minute, 500. They were good, solid races, and you just know those birds, don't you?
Well, I did a similar thing. I got a few years ago. I got 2nd fed in the 5, and in the 2nd VHA 5. In the first 5, the pigeon got home at 1 o'clock Sunday, and I thought, oh, you know, this pigeon struggled a bit. You know, I was really surprised. By Wednesday, it was by far the best looking pigeon in my loft. So I doubled it back. We had a 12-hour 500-mile race on the day, and she just got beaten for first fed. She was 2nd fed, and she's the grandmother of me national winner. So, you know, they've bred on. But the pigeon showed me, it just, I thought, oh, I never do this. I never double them back. But she just looked so outstanding. I just had to send her.
And sometimes they're that fit, you know they're good. You just know it. It's interesting, Steve wouldn't normally do that, but 4 days later I mightn't do it either. But I've seen pigeons. I've picked my clock pigeons in long races, and I send big teams, 25 pigeons sometimes. Yet one of them just hits you in the eye, and you know they're right. And I've never been wrong yet. I haven't done it a lot, 5 or 6 times, but you just know they're right.
Do you look underneath prior to, when you're picking your birds, the colour of the muscle, the keel? Do you do that?
I do look at that, yeah. I do look at it all.
And what's a no for you?
Oh, if they look like they're getting a bit thin, or generally any sign of bad health. But those ones that shine on the floor, like Steve said, you don't have to look at them, you know they're right. They just tell you they're right. That's super fit. And it's interesting, we don't always get them all super fit.
No.
Some people do, and that's why they have sensational seasons.
What about the muscle, the keel colour? If it's, see, the keel's a bit red, not white, if the muscles has gone, and under light can look different too, so you've got to be careful. Under fluorescent lights can look different than in the sunlight, the muscle. Do you look at any of that, and is any of those a no for you?
Well, people talk about scale and all that sort of thing, and I've won feds with pigeons covered in scale on their breast, flying at 1,000 metres a minute. I'm not sure. Look, I learned a lesson a long, long time ago. I went to a fellow who's passed on now, Charlie Pegg, and he gave me a pigeon, and I had a look underneath, and I did all that, and I thought, gee, this pigeon's fantastic. Keel was white, the muscle was round, was pink, and just terrific. And I said, oh, this pigeon's ready. He said, I haven't let it out for 6 months. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, they can look good like that.
Because he did it with the food. So you can do all those things with food. And it doesn't matter if the pigeon, the most important thing when you're selecting a pigeon is how it looks. I mean, I can tell a story. I had a pigeon which, well, back when I lived in Briar Hill, which is in the 70s, and it was lovely round-bodied hen, and by the time I got to the 500, she was just skinny and keely. And I said to the fellow who bred it for me, I said, oh, she's gone all skinny and keely. He said, set her. So I said, oh, I won't clock this pigeon because I've got all these lovely hens that are beautiful and all that. Have a guess what I clocked? So I raced her again the next year. When she got in that same condition, I put her in and pulled her. Have a guess, I got her again. Because that was the individual pigeon. But if you went on all these markers, it's got to be round, it's got to be pink, all these things, that pigeon wouldn't go to the race. So, but she looked fantastic. She just looked, she was glowing, but she didn't handle right. But she was right.
What about buoyancy of a bird?
Go on, Jeff.
I get very amused about people that say a pigeon handles light, because a pigeon weighs about, a pound? And people reckon they can tell the difference between half an ounce. they're better than me. That's better than me, but the pigeons are naturally heavier or lighter than others, and I personally believe you need to just breed light handling pigeons.
Yeah, light frame pigeons.
Light frame pigeons,
Yeah.
I think you need to breed them. A heavy boned pigeon, you might win with them one day, but gee, I don't know if they're good to put in the stock loft. So a pigeon I think should be naturally buoyant, and then you work from there. I think there's too many variables in pigeon racing, and the one thing is that they haven't all got the same ability, and you never know until you race them. So you can't pick it with the eye unless you've got, it's one thing to say, as Steve said, he raced a pigeon that they said would never fly the distance, but they throw those pigeons up. That's how we learnt to fly the distance. They started with pigeons that came home from 200 mile, and eventually they bred pigeons that come home from 600 miles. So pigeons will do it, and then you start breeding around the ones that do it.
We'll be back after this short break.
The Australian Racing Pigeon Journal has been an interesting educational read since 1993 and still a significant way to keep abreast of the sport of pigeon racing. In each exciting monthly magazine, editor Jeff Howe brings together Australian and international articles. Join pigeon fanciers throughout the world who subscribe and enjoy the Australian Racing Pigeon Journal. Loft visits, training tips, pigeon strains, as well as health advice from world-renowned avian veterinarians are regular topics featured in this great read. There is nothing better than keeping a quality magazine on the shelf to read anytime.
In some early races, some people have that belief they've got to hold the food back and basically what we call racing on starvo. Have you ever practiced that? Do you see it generally, and what's your opinion on it?
Well, my opinion on that is that if you hold the pigeon back with its food and its preparation early in the season, don't expect to get it at the end of the season. And it's as simple as that. If you starve your pigeons early, you're not going to get them up, because people forget we're racing young pigeons. We're not racing mature 2 and 3 year olds, where if you did that, perhaps you'll get away with it. But with young pigeons, once you do that, hold them back. What you're trying to do early is to get them hours on the wing, bit of experience, let them build up, rather than knocking them down. I think if you do that, you knock the pigeons down. That's just my opinion. I would never do it, and I've never done it.
Yeah.
No, I don't do it. I was started in pigeon racing. Well, I did race when I was young, but I started back in pigeon racing when my brother-in-law started me off again, Noel Barnes, and he always said to me, give them as much food as they like. He was a very successful flyer, and he always wanted as much food into them as he could get. So I never starved them, never hold food off from them. I might regulate the food, feed them when they get in, take the food off them, but they always get as much as they like. For
long races, do any years practice keeping some of those young birds back? You only race them to say 300-400 kilometres and then save them as old birds. Do you do that? Have you tried that? And is there success either way? Steve?
Well, I haven't personally tried that. I mean, what I'm trying to breed is pigeons that'll breed me what we call young birds, yearling pigeons, that'll fly out to 500 miles or 800 kilometres on the day. And unless you do that and race them to there, you won't know where you're going with your breeding. I mean, I went to Scotland 10 years ago or longer now and spoke to a fellow there called Jock Ellis, and he'd been placed in Scottish national races every year for 50 years. And he had the first pigeon ever to get a gold medallion into the Scottish National Flying Club as a 2-year-old, because he raced at the 500 miles, the same age as what we do, and then the next year again. And he said, well, it proved to him that if you race your young pigeons out, and providing they're in good condition at the time, they'll do those 12, 13, 14, 15 hour flies on the day. And I think you can do that. But if I want to race 2-year-olds, I have to change. Well, I've stopped my pigeons at 400 kilometres and keep them till next year and then race them. I don't know what they're going to do. Just because they're old doesn't make them good. So I then race them the following year. Then I discover, oh, these are the ones that are more capable of what I want. So therefore I've lost a whole year. I've actually lost 2 years in my breeding loft. So I just don't do it. I mean, I know people do it. I've flown very well with 2-year-olds, but they were very good yearlings. They weren't stinted as yearlings. They flew right through as yearlings. Then I raced them again as 2-year-olds, and they were still good pigeons. But just because they're older doesn't make them better.
Jeff, what do you do?
I haven't flown a lot of 2-year-olds in the past. I do keep the better ones now. I find the problem with 2-year-olds, you have a real issue with weight, and weight's a big killer with pigeons. If you race a pigeon as a 2-year-old, I've had them grow enormously in size, and I've ended up losing pigeons that have flown 600 mile, at 300 and 400 mile, because their weight's just not right, and I think it makes them more susceptible to hawk attacks. I stick to, I do fly 2-year-olds, especially if I've got good pigeons that I'm not going to put in stock. I'm not going to get rid of them. I will hang on to them, but I've had a little bit of success. But I tend to like to breed another round of birds and race them as yearlings, or babies as we call them. Or we call them yearlings. Overseas they call them babies. Yeah.
I know of people who say that the yearlings are good and they never do any good with 2-year-olds, even though they're good as yearlings, because they get smart. They get, they know where the falcons are, and they just think, oh, well, as long as I get home, there's no rush. What's your view on that?
Look, they know where the falcons are, they get cunning, they don't race. I've heard all those things. They could be right. Could be right, I don't know. Well,
the good ones that fly, that you've raced well as a yearling and then raced good as a 2-year-old, they haven't become hawk shy and know where every falcon is and don't race home. It gets back to the old thing that I believe is just because it's old doesn't make it good.
I must say, I think back, you ask these questions, I think back of pigeons. I had pigeons in 11-hour, 400-mile feds, 20th fed, 23rd fed. I've raced them the next year. I've lost them in 7-hour races. It makes you dumbfounded. But that's why I think the only issue is you just don't get their weight right. I don't think if a pigeon can fly a 10, 11-hour, 400-mile fed and get in the fed, and I'm thinking of pigeons I've had, then you race them next year and lose them in a 7 or 8 hour race, you think, well, this pigeon can do it. What's happened? What's happened? A pigeon that's flown a 400-mile race in my loft had 4 or 5 races. It's not as if it's only been to one race, and had a lot of training. A lot of training. You think of how many, I toss Saturdays and Sundays generally, not long. A pigeon that's got to a 400's had an awful lot of flying, an awful lot of training. Why would you lose a pigeon like that in a 7-hour race? I think it's all got to do with weight.
What is a couple of key points that you would advise a person who's getting into the sport, from the breeding through to the getting the birds to the races and racing, and hopefully having enough to get out a bit? What's a couple of key points would you point to a beginner?
Well, I think one of the key things is regularity. That if you're going to race pigeons, you have to do things on a regular basis. It's most important. Animals like to know that at this time this is what's going to happen, and every pigeon flyer that's ever told me anything has always stressed that you just got to be regular with what you do with your pigeons. Get the best pigeons that you can get at the time. if you're starting up, go to local flyers at the end of the season. You always should be able to get some pigeons from people. They're always willing to help, in my experience, give you pigeons that have flown the races. I remember the first race pigeons I was ever given. They'd both flown the 500-mile race that year, and they were given to me as, to start me up. Well, they're the sort of pigeons. You get regularity, you get pigeons from your local area, and see if you can latch on to a good flyer who can explain to you what to do and what you shouldn't do. I mean, you'll hear 1,000 things about pigeon racing. Just try and keep it as simple as possible and just listen to the flyers in your area, the best flyer in your area.
I think I would be telling them to get a regular training regime, be punctual, like Steve's saying. You can't just, it's a full-time job, and be patient and try not to listen to too many theories. Hopefully approach a good flyer at the club, and hopefully they can mentor the flyer and listen to them until you feel you've got enough confidence to start making decisions on your own. You can get very confused by what a lot of people say they do. There's fads. I hear, so-and-so's won a race and they've been tossing at Geelong 3 times a week, so everyone races down to Geelong to toss. It's about what you do. Pigeon racing is about what you do every day. It's a percentage of everything you do, what you feed, how you train, how you observe, how you manage your pigeons. And it's Doug Ince used to say it's a 20-year apprenticeship. So be patient, but I think it's important if you just find someone who flies well, hopefully they will mentor you until you get enough confidence to make your own decisions.
I'd like to thank you for coming in to the show tonight. And in Brisbane, good night, David.
Good night, Rod, Jeff, Stephen and our viewers. Good luck, good racing and good returns. Before we end tonight's show and closing Series 2, I'd like to announce over the coming weeks, Rod and I will combine all the starting up segments to complete a comprehensive tutorial to follow. If you watch our show on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like buttons. Rod, on previous shows we talked about grants and how to get them. I've here a letter we received this week from the Queensland Government. It reads, on behalf of the Queensland Government and the GCBC, I'm pleased to advise that a grant of $35,000 has been awarded to your organisation. The GCBC awards funding to not-for-profit community groups to enhance their capacity to provide services, leisure activities and opportunities for Queensland communities. As Minister responsible for the fund, I know firsthand the hard work organisations such as yours contribute to the community. I wish your organisation every success with its future endeavours. Yours sincerely, Shannon Fenton, MP, Attorney General and Member for Waterford. Along with this grant, over the last 12 months we've received $67,000 in grants and now totals $107,000 in grants over the last several years. This also is on top of an annual income of between $10,000 to $15,000 generated by these grants. I'll also take this opportunity, you may see us if you follow us on Facebook. The North Road Combine will be promoting our money races for the year. Our first money race, the Dash for Cash, we ran last week, and congratulations to Emmanuel Malik for taking out the first prize.
You've been watching Pigeon Racing World Winners 1. I'm Rod Simmons. Good night.